Upon finishing the movie Tenet, I was left, as many Christopher Nolan movies do, with an indescribable yet so severe sense of satisfaction. Tenet is Nolan's second most recent project, releasing only 3 years before Oppenheimer in September of 2020. It is rated decently well, but compared to some of his other projects, it seems to fall a bit short. Oppenheimer and Inception, often credited as some of Nolan's best works, are rated an 8.2 and 8.8 out of 10 on IMDb respectively. Oppenheimer received an outstanding 93% critic score on Rotten Tomatoes and an equally astounding 91% audience score. On the other hand, Inception received 87 and 91 in those same categories. However, Tenet was given an IMDb score of only 7.3 and has remarkably low scores on Rotten Tomatoes, with a 70% critic review and 76% audience review. Something about this movie appears to have missed the mark, both to the likes of critics and the general audience. Or rather, in my opinion, critics and audiences missed the mark. The bad reviews of Tenet highlight some very common complaints with the film. Many are very practical, such as some of the audio mixing being off, a problem that I myself encountered. Another common criticism is how tedious the movie is. Another, how unoriginal the "we've got to defeat the bad guy before they start World War III" story is. But far and away the most popular criticism, and one that I shared upon my first watch, was that the film is far too confusing. Time manipulation is a slippery slope, and one that if not treaded upon carefully, will leave the audience both confused and poking holes in the logistics of your world. With time travel comes a lot of rules, many of which carry throughout most of popular media, but remain confusing nonetheless. A good example is the consequences of changing the past. In Tenet, as Neil puts it, what's happened happened, and therefore cannot be changed, so going back in time only places you within that moment. However, changing elements in the past does change elements of the future, and vice versa, as seen many times throughout Tenet, as we see that our protagonist is on screen much more than we originally thought. This is opposed to a time travel element like the show Dark, which I would argue is an equally complex and confusing system of time travel. Within that show, changing the past does not directly change the events of the future, but rather inserts the characters into that time period. This is what creates the 33-year time loop that the show is about, as characters grow up 33 years, only to go through the exact same events they experienced 33 years prior. It's a complex idea, but that only acts to further my point. Time travel is very confusing, and attempting to force the audience's understanding of it within a brand new world all in the span of 2.5 hours is no easy feat, hence the criticism. The complexity itself is even highlighted by the film. In a scene where the protagonist asks Neil a number of questions about how time travel works, Neil eventually asks, quote, "Does your head hurt?" To which the protagonist replies, "Yes." The protagonist expects more elaboration, as does the audience, as it is still clear he doesn't fully understand how this works, which means neither do we. But in an unexpected twist, Neil tells the protagonist to, quote, "try to sleep," and nothing more. So how does Nolan expect the audience to understand this system if his main character doesn't even understand it, and he overtly refuses to tell either of them any more? The answer to this question lies in one simple, otherwise throwaway line towards the beginning of the film. Around the 15-minute mark of the movie, the scientist that the protagonist is speaking to, the one that explains both to him and the audience how the inversion mechanic works, delivers this line.
"Don't try to understand it. Feel it."
The line is used as a demonstration, as immediately following it is a spectacle where the doctor makes the inverted bullet spin around and eventually bounce across the table. Upon my first watch, I thought that the line had something to do with the way the doctor was able to control the inverted bullet. Many popular supernatural elements within movies are controlled with this feeling. No example is more obvious than the Force from Star Wars. There's no physical tool that Luke has to use in order to use the Force. He simply uses it. When Ben Kenobi is training Luke upon the Millennium Falcon, he forces Luke to train wearing a helmet which blocks his vision. The Force is much more a feeling than it is a technology or weapon. This is exactly what I thought the inversion mechanic was in Tenet. However, it's almost exactly the opposite. Not only is it a technology, and furthermore a technology used to create a weapon, the feeling the Doctor talks about has nothing to do with the way the characters use the inversion, but rather how the audience does. Tenet is incredibly fast-paced and doesn't leave the audience with a lot of time to mull over new ideas. Part of this is the story, as new objectives are tossed around very frequently, but the editing of the film also has a heavy part to play. Rather than the long pans to establish setting that take place in some of Nolan's other works, like The Dark Knight, Tenet takes advantage of very sudden cuts to place the audience right in the middle of whatever's going on. In the scene I referenced before, where the protagonist and Neil are talking about the rules of time travel, right after Neil tells the protagonist to try to get some sleep, there's an immediate cut to the next scene where the truck abruptly stops. There's no slow pan over the truck to give the audience some idea of where they're going or what caused the abrupt stop. Instead, we are thrust into this new event and left wondering why the truck stopped. This is far from the only instance where this editing tactic is used, and while I originally noted its unique nature at the beginning of the movie, it became completely commonplace by the end of the film. The artificial pace injected by this editing technique, along with the story already being pretty quick, leaves almost no time for the audience to really think about the mechanisms of the inversion. Instead, they're shown it and really have to piece together who goes where and how they got there on the fly. Because of this, it's very easy to completely miss elements of the film because there's literally just too much going on. The crux lies in not understanding the workings of the film, but rather feeling it. When the credits rolled, I was still sitting on my couch, trying to figure out the hows and wheres of characters, and still trying to create some kind of cohesive rulebook that made sense to me. I thought back to the scene with the doctor and found my answer. It didn't lie in her explanation of the inversion itself, but rather how to use it. 15 minutes into the film, Nolan literally tells the audience not to try and understand the inversion mechanic. He is fully aware of the chaos that the rest of the film contains, and in order to caution the audience, he warns them not to think too deeply about it. The meaning of the inversion is not to be some complex system to be talked about as the best supernatural ingredient in film history. It's supposed to add an immensely cool element to the story, which, in my opinion, it does. When you watch this film from the perspective of feeling the inversion rather than understanding it, the film becomes an entirely new piece of media. It transforms from a basic story with a kind of confusing plot element to an experience that leaves you feeling very satisfied. Nolan doesn't ask you to contemplate the satisfaction you feel from the ending. He only asks you to feel it. Most Christopher Nolan films leave the audience with some kind of feeling. Whether it's triumph, wonder, heroism, or something else, each one gifts the audience an emotion that signals you just watched a piece of incredible cinema. While many times it might be appropriate to question what aspect of the film causes these emotions, perhaps the story or the characters or the music, I don't think that's the case with Tenet. In fact, I think it's quite inappropriate to do so. It is of human nature to inquire about the whys of our world, and so naturally we do that with films as well. But Tenet specifically asks you not to do that, and in my opinion, that's why it's so brilliant. While yes, it includes some very intense chase sequences, the terrific writing that's expected from a Nolan film, and even scratches my itch for a good heist movie sometimes, the way it asks the audience to live with the wonder and spectacle of the inversion mechanic, rather than break it down and understand it bit by bit, is what makes it such an enjoyable watch. Tenet has become one of my favorite movies of all time, not because I understand its inner workings or emotions, but because I decided not to. And in a paradoxical sort of way, that is the best way to understand its inner workings. To bring this point to its most meaningful core, I think this lesson is one that can be used so broadly on life as a whole. Not everything in our world has to be understood. Especially with other people, we don't need to figure out why we feel certain ways when we're with these people, and other ways when we're with those people. Sometimes it's better just to feel, to forgo that quest for knowledge and just accept the confusion, but within that confusion, thrive in that feeling. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.